Did you know 42% of adults find themselves in some sort of step relationship, either with a step parent, stepchild, or step sibling? If you've ever been in this step reality, you know it comes with its own unique set of challenges. I'm your host, Rob Philo, and today on the Wind-Shaped Marriage Podcast, I talk with Ron Deal, a licensed marriage and family therapist specializing in marriage enrichment and stepfamily education. Ron is one of the most widely read and viewed experts on blended families. He's a best-selling author of many books, including the popular book, The Smart Stepfamily. I talk with him about the unique dynamic stepfamilies experience, specifically strategies for couples in co-parenting relationships. It's an insightful conversation. Let's dive in. Ron Deal, thank you so much for joining us today on the Wind-Shaped Marriage Podcast. We're super excited to have you.
Well, thank you. It's quite an honor, and I always love working with Wind-Shaped.
And Ron, I'm super excited for today's conversation. I actually grew up in a household with divorced parents. And so one of the things I did when I got married a couple of years ago is went back and read your book. Somebody introduced me to The Smart Stepfamily. And so I went through and read the book. And it was one of those moments where it was like, you know, when you take a personality test and you get the results and you're like, this is crazy how close, like,
Yes.
is this person watching my life right now?
It's scary real.
It's scary
right?
real. And I had one of those moments where I was going through the book and I was like, how does Ron know all of these things? But before we get into that, could you tell our audience a little bit about who you are and what got you involved in stepfamily ministry in particular?
Yeah, so Nan and I have been married for 38 years, and we've been in ministry in some form or another for 35 of those years. I got my start as a youth pastor and figured out real fast that I didn't know enough about the family. I actually had an undergraduate degree in family studies, but I didn't know enough about the families of the kids that I was working with. So I decided to go back to graduate school and study marriage and family therapy, not because I wanted to be a therapist full-time, but because I wanted to understand family systems, how relationships actually work, and how the church can be proactive to help prevent problems and strengthen families so that the next generation will come to know the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, Psalm 78. Because it's all tied together. Faith, family, relationships, it's all connected. So I wanted to be able to manage that well. Well, when I got to graduate school, I had this required course in what they called non-traditional family therapy. And by the way, Rob, I would say fast forward now 30 years, the new non-traditional family is stepfamilies. I mean, what we used to call them non-traditional, they're now the new traditional family, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And so that class opened my eyes to these kids in this youth program that I had been working with. It helped me understand their life, their journey, made sense of it, and it set me on a path of trying to understand kids in single-parent homes, kids in blended family homes better. And that led me to blended family marriage, blended family dynamics. And so for over 30 years now, I have been spending time thinking about, focused on helping blended families. It hasn't been exclusively what I've done, but it's been a pretty significant part of what I've done for 30 years. And I would say the last, 17 years, 18 years, I've done it exclusively. 12 now years with Family Life, created what we call Family Life Blended, our division of Family Life, where that's what we specialize in, is helping grow couples and parents and step-parents and helping them understand their journey, but also helping the church know what the church can do at a local level to support blended families and the kids that live in their homes.
Yeah, that's super amazing. And thank you for everything that you've done to invest in blended families in particular. And as I was preparing for this conversation, I went back through and flipped through your book, The Smart Stepfamily, and was looking at some of the points that initially stuck out to me that I mentioned kind of earlier about, wow, this feels crazy similar. And would love it if today on our conversation, we can just run through a couple of those points and you can talk a little bit more about what you were thinking when you wrote that.
Throw it at me. I don't have the book memorized, but I do have a copy here, so I can take a look at it.
Yeah, happy to. So one of the things that you wrote that really stuck out to me is you said, when it comes to co-parenting, respect the other parent in his or her household. Do not demean the other's living circumstance, activities, dates, or decisions. And I think it's really interesting hearing that, because especially when you think about the context of step families, there's an element of brokenness that exists in there of like, you guys are obviously not on the best terms. What do you mean when you say kind of respect the other family, and how can families do that well?
It's a great question. Let me back up just a step because I want to set the context for our listeners and viewers. First of all, not every blended family has children who move back and forth between homes. There are a lot of ways that people find themselves in a stepfamily situation, one of which is divorce, and then kids are moving between two households. The other situations, by the way, is post-death of a parent where kids aren't going anywhere, but dad died or mom died, and now mom has married again somebody who is now the stepfather to the kids. And there's actually a third pathway into blended family living, and it's somebody who has a child and they weren't ever married. And now they're marrying somebody who becomes the step-parent to their biological child. So there's a lot of different journeys and pathways. But this issue about children moving between homes and how the parents navigate that co-parent relationship is so near and dear to my heart. Because of what I said a little while ago, I started in youth ministry. And actually, Rob, between you and me, I think I'm still doing youth ministry. When I'm helping a couple, when I'm helping co-parents, when I'm talking to a step-grandparent about how to love this new step-grandchild in their world, and they're not even sure how to start, to me, what I'm doing at the end of the day is pouring into the lives of children, the next generation. And I don't care if those children are 30, and they're adults when mom got married again, or if they're 15, or if they're 3. To me, I want to try to help them have a home life where they can meet the Lord, where God is supreme and honored in how people respect each other or treat each other. And at the end of the day, they are able to catch faith and carry God with them. So with that, back to your question. Let me answer it this way. Why is respect between homes so necessary? If I asked you, I tell co-parents, you want to be the U.S. and Canada. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been to Canada. I've been there a few times. They're great people. We love them, and they love us, and we get along, and we watch TV programs that are the same. And you can cross the border, and nobody asks you, why are you here? And nobody is mad at you because you left one country and went to the other one. Now, Canada has a totally different system of government than we do, and they have different money system, different laws, and there's a few things that are the same, but there's a lot of things that are different, but we still like each other. We get along really well. A child moving between the U.S. and Canada has no worries at the end of the day. There's a few things they have to adjust to, but they're not afraid to cross the border. Now, imagine if your co-parent situation is Russia and Ukraine, or Israel and Hamas. Okay. Everything's dangerous. You never know who's on your side. You don't know who you can trust. You're all alone. And the minute you go from one side to the other, they look at you as if you've betrayed them. And then, now you're afraid to even interact with those people, let alone make a comment about how much you like the people in the other country, because now they're really going to be mad at you. So you get the picture real quick, don't you? That's a horrible environment for a child. All right. Respect is step one to be in the U.S. and Canada. Okay, they're different government, different ways of doing things in one country or the other, U.S. and Canada, but we still like each other. We still say, I'm glad you're going over there. Have a good time. We still respect what happens in that other country. And yeah, we compete when the Olympics show up. But other than that, it's just all good fun and games. It sets an environment where children can be children, where love is still love, and I don't have to choose sides. But when there's war, then everybody feels like they have to choose sides. It polarizes, it isolates, it creates stress, the stress hormones in children between Russia and Ukraine. You can just imagine what that would be like. Yeah. It's just horrendous, right? So the nature of respect says they're adults, they're still a parent, and even if they've recoupled. So let's say you're a father and your former wife lives in the other home and she's now married to a guy who's the stepchildren to your children, right? That can be a hard thing for you internally, but to show respect on the outside, that they get to be in control of their home, and that they get to determine some of their own rules, and some of them you like, some of them you don't like. And those are all real things that happen. And so, but in spite of those differences, how can I bring a measure of respect and honor to who they are so that this child doesn't hear from me a message of choose me, not them? That's war.
Yeah, it makes it so much easier for the child to go back and forth from household to household. And I imagine if you're in a situation where you're trying to critique or fix or make changes in the other household, I can imagine things get messy pretty quickly.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. And bottom line is, when you become angry and hostile about who they are, the odds are they're going to turn around and do the same thing to you. What is it that Paul says in Romans 12? Don't repay evil with evil. That's actually what it begets. In Matthew 7, when Jesus says, hey, don't stand in condemnation of another person, because you're going to get the same thing you're dishing out. Like, there's something about it that invites more of the same from the other side. So instead of repaying evil with evil, you repay evil with good. Then you've just upped the possibility that they might return good back to you. That's what we're going for. So we want to influence with positivity, with Christ-likeness, rather than playing the game and continuing the war.
Yeah, and I could see someone listening thinking like, okay, but my ex won't do that. Like, they won't live by the same standard, but you can always set the precedent for what the relationship will look like. And once you set the terms, you might notice that they might respond a little bit differently too.
That's right. Now, let me just add a couple of thoughts, because that's a really good point. It's an important point. What Paul goes on to say in Romans chapter 12 is, don't repay evil with evil, but repay evil with good. And in so doing, here's the outcome for some people. He gives this interesting little phrase, heaped burning coals onto the heads of others. It's a phrase that sort of basically said you can soften their hard heart with some warmth. So in doing good, you might soften the hard heart of the evil person and bring them around. Who knows what your influence might bear in terms of the other person and their life. Now, having said that, that's the hopefulness of why we would want to be in charge of ourselves and manage how we respond to the other home. But there are some people listening who, honestly, your situation is, they're not ever coming around.
Yeah.
Right? There's extenuating circumstances. There's a personality disorder. There is something going on in their life that you don't get to influence at all. And in those situations, I want to say sorry. Those are really difficult. You also get to not be milquetoast. You don't have to be a doormat. You don't have to let them just run all over you. Like, there's places to say no, but you can still sort of have that respectful tone of loving your enemy, if you will, and responding in a way that's decent. You can still say no and be decent. And that's really what you're striving for in that really difficult situation.
Yeah, that's great wisdom. Let's move on to the next point from your book, The Smart Step Family. You mentioned, and this one caught me by surprise a little bit, you said, schedule a regular meeting to discuss co-parenting matters. This is staying in that lane of co-parenting, but you said address things like schedules, academics, behavior, spiritual development. That feels like something that would be super challenging, but talk a little bit about what you mean when you say that.
Well, countries have diplomats that go between them and, hey, what are you guys up to? This is what we're up to. Let's collaborate. Communication, trying to say, we still are in the business, co-parents are in the business of raising their mutual child. And so you got to talk it through. What's going on in this child's school, schedules, people in their lives, going to church and, what are they learning over there? Here's what we're learning over here. The kids are coming to your house for 6 weeks this summer. Are you going on vacation? Can I send them with the right clothes so they'll be prepared to enjoy themselves when they're with you? All of those things that if you were sending them to grandma's house, you'd have that conversation, right? You're sending them to mom's house or dad's house. You want to have that same collaborative environment because, again, that's how you keep diplomacy high and the level of cooperation high as well. All of that creates a climate where kids get to live in peace and walk back and forth across the border.
Yeah, and I think from the parents' perspective too, I think that helps with involvement because you're clued in on more things happening with the child. If it's
Mm-hmm.
like a friend and you're like, hey, this friend did this, just so you know, you need to watch out for that. It makes the
Yeah.
other kid or the other parent feel a little bit more looped in so that they have more of a relationship, more, I don't know, to talk about with the kid too.
Yeah. And here's the challenge behind all this one, Rob, because the respect one and the collaboration communication tip are rooted in that belief that kids are better off when the parents are working toward a common good. But the problem is these are two people who fell out of love with one another and probably fell out of like with one another
Yeah.
and aren't very motivated towards getting along. I mean, if you were highly motivated and you could make that happen, you probably would still be married,
Yeah.
but you're not. So something has happened. And now you have to come together in agreement around your child when you could not come together in agreement about your personal relationship. This is tough. It's difficult. It is a discipline. You do have to set aside your own personal pain and angst of the past and say, you know what? I'm still wrestling with forgiving you for this or that. But when it comes to talking to you about our child, I got to set that aside and try to be in the business of being a parent. I coach people, set aside your personal business, the personal anger or hurts from the past, and focus on the parental task at hand. And if you can make that separation, then you're going to be more cooperative and more collaborative.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. Moving on to our next point here, you said when children express confusion or anger towards your ex, don't use it as an opportunity to berate the other parent. I'm thinking of example of like your kid come home from the other parent's house and is thinking like, man, I can't believe dad this or whatnot. And I could see a parent using that as an opportunity to be like, yeah, your dad is terrible or your mom is terrible.
Yeah.
Talk a little
There's so
bit
many
about
weapons.
Yeah, talk about
There's so
that.
many weapons in co-parenting, unfortunately. Children are vulnerable to it, and parents have this opportunity to jump all over that moment and make themselves look good to the child. And it's a way of stabbing the former spouse in the back, which goes right back to what I just said. You got to set aside your personal hurt and anger over the past. If you're still trying to get revenge for it, well, then you're going to take advantage of those moments, and you're going to use those words to pull the child in your direction away from the other parent. And all that does is split your child in half. I'm pretty direct with co-parents. Like, you need to understand what you're saying. When you say to your child, your mom, she can never remember anything. She's always screwing everything up. What you are saying to your child is, and so are you, because that child is half of that mother. Any derogatory comment you make about a child's other parent is internalized by the child, and over time, they take some of those things to heart. Not only are you saying that about mom, with whom I love and care, but now, in effect, you're saying that about me because I'm part of her. So you're dividing your child and you're denigrating your child.
Yeah. And I think that's helpful context too to understand the child's perspective because, and you said this earlier, you might have fallen out of like with your ex, but your child still loves them and they're
right.
still a huge part of their heart. And so
That's right.
Getting stuck in the middle like that can just create so many weird feelings and challenging feelings for the kid that probably aren't the most conducive environment for them to thrive and be happy.
Keep going. But let me just add, kids get calculating at that point. Now, they're tiptoeing all the time around what they say around either side. No matter what country they're in, they're worried about how their words are going to be used against them, against somebody else, and they just want to keep peace. And so all of a sudden, your child is diminishing back into the shadows because anything they say in the light ends up being used for dark. And so I'll just stay over here where I don't cause any more problems and make things worse. Well, then your child doesn't trust you enough to bring themselves to to life in your presence. Like, they're hiding from you at that point. See, it just ripples in all the wrong directions, not only for the child, but obviously for the parent as well.
Yeah, and it's easy to see in that example that you talk about where there are lifelong repercussions to that, where a child's feeling of not having safety at home can echo throughout the rest of their life. So
that's right.
Jumping into our next point here, you said, children should have everything they need in each home. Don't make them bring necessities back and forth. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so when you go to grandma's house, you might actually have a pair of pajamas over there,
Yeah.
and it feels like going home, right? Because my stuff's here, but you don't necessarily have everything over there. You might pack your toothbrush and bring a few things that are important and special to you, but it feels like home because you know where you're going to sleep and you know the bed and the environment. When you sort of treat your child like a visitor, then you pack them up and you have to send everything with them because they have nothing that they need when they get over there. No, they belong in both countries. They have a home in each place, and it should basically have everything they need to live in that home. Now, there's always a special object for young children, perhaps. Sometimes we recommend that to help them move between two different households. It's something they can hold on to that's consistent in that transition. But even older children, want their backpack. Kids in high school want their phone. The things that they absolutely need are going to be with them, and that's going to travel with them. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the basic necessities, clothes. You want them to feel like this is their home.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't want them living out of a suitcase because it feels like you're just on vacation, basically, or just traveling or whatnot. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, when we think about co-parent relationships, the ultimate goal is for the kid to feel at home in both households. Mm-hmm. And so if they're at your house and yet they don't have the things that make their home a home, it's no wonder it doesn't feel like home to them.
They feel like a stranger or a visitor.
Yeah, for sure.
Then they're not at home.
Yeah, no doubt. You also mentioned make your custody structure work for your children, even if you don't like the details of your arrangement. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, this is attitude. It is not fun not being able to celebrate your child's birthday or Christmas on Christmas Day. It's not fun that you have to figure out a way to do Christmas morning 3 days before Christmas Day actually happens. Everybody wants to celebrate it on Christmas Day, but child can't be in two places at once and both households. So, most divorce decrees are going to dictate, all right, the first year it's dad's house and next year it's mom's house. You're going to take turns. And however it is that you work out the logistics of that, you may be unhappy that you're not getting this special day to celebrate. I think you got to step back and you go, wait a minute, what's most important about everything is that you bring your presence and the child feels, and I don't mean presents as in gifts, although that works in both directions for Christmas, but you bring your presence, your being to the equation and have the attitude that says, we're going to celebrate, we're going to make the best of this, you're here with us, we're doing Christmas together. We're just doing it, pretending like it's Christmas Day and making the most of it. That is what, at the end of the day, sells it for children. That's what helps them celebrate the holiday. And yes, they're going to have to get in the car in a couple of days and go to the other home for Christmas Day. Make the most of it. Sometimes people come to me and say, I really don't like this arrangement. And it's an inconvenience for sure. And then they say, should we go back to court to try to change it? Oh, man, no. I would be very wary of going to court over little things like that. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, this is not hugely significant in your life or the life of the child. So be wary of that. Make the most of it. That's the point. Your attitude is everything.
Yeah. And I'd be curious, kind of as part of this conversation, as the child grows up and starts developing their own rhythms, routines, friends, social circles, whatnot.
Preferences for where they're going to spend their time.
Yeah. How do you navigate that conversation with both parents and then also the child as well?
There's not a black and white answer.
Yeah.
It's not, you have to do this. It is a conversation with your child. And I often tell people, let me just kind of do a little extreme here. Kids often, when they become teenagers and have their own social network, they rather spend the holiday or their birthday here rather than over there. But it's our turn. And so that means you're not coming. That means we have to go to plan B, C, or D and figure out how we're going to celebrate your birthday with you. And not convenient, not fun. And yet, for the sake of your child, if that feels like a legitimate thing for them, where they're rooted for one reason or another in that other home on that special day, then I would make the concession. I'm not talking about where kids are being manipulative. I'm not talking about where the other parent in the other home is feeding them all kinds of negative things about you and they're being manipulated
Yeah.
into stay. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about the child's preference needs to carry more and more weight the older they get, and that will require sacrifices by both households at some level more often than not.
Yeah. And when you get to that point, is it just you mentioned having a conversation with a child. How do you approach that conversation? Is it, hey, where do you want to spend your time? Or
Yeah. I mean, I think if you're having ongoing communication with your child about their world and their life and moving between homes and when hiccups come up and things, hey, we got to work this out with your dad and whatever, then it's not such a bizarre thing to bring this up.
Yeah.
If you've never had those kind of conversations, then it can be awkward and you can feel the pressure of it, but you both know it's something that you need to talk about. You ask with curiosity and compassion. That's your posture, not accusation and anger, right?
Yeah.
The posture of, hey, why don't you want to be with us on your birthday is not going to get you very far and it's probably not going to get you the truth.
Yeah, that's true.
A different question that says, with a smile on your face, hey, I'm sensing that you're going to want to be at the other home on your birthday. Man, I'm going to miss you. But I get it. I want to hear more about that. Help me understand that. And then let's figure out how we can celebrate you. That's an invitation to hearing the child's heart. You're communicating on the front end. I'm going to make this work for you, but I do want to understand more. I need you to share a little bit with me. That's a totally different posture that's more inviting.
Yeah. And I can imagine the posture, though being difficult, means the world to a child when they say, actually, yeah, I do want to spend my birthday with my friends at mom's house or dad's house or whoever, and you just accepting that. And
yeah. And let me go the next step because imagine a young man who's spent his whole childhood, for the most part of it anyway, in his mom's house. Every other weekend at dad's or maybe one weekend a month with dad. And now this little boy becomes 13, 15, 16, and he's wanting time with dad. That is a very natural thing to occur developmentally. It makes sense. And imagine this 14, 15-year-old coming to mom and saying, I want to go live with dad. I want to reverse our custody arrangement. I'm going to spend more time over there because I haven't gotten much time with dad, but now I really want to do that. Imagine a mom's heart. Ouch, right? Ugh, no, I want you here. I want our time. I love you. And might this feel like rejection? Absolutely. Again, this is one of those, look deep into your heart, listen to your child's heart. If they are making a genuine, authentic request that is out of a deep desire to just know dad more, I think you got to really consider letting them go. I'm not talking about manipulation.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about a kid's trying to get out of doing chores. I'm not talking about a kid who's been fed a bunch of lies by biological father and now they want to go. I'm not talking about that because those are extreme circumstances and those do happen, unfortunately. I'm just talking about a child's need. Yep, I think you ought to let them go. Let them have a season where they spend more time over there than they spend it with you. It will do your child so much good.
Yeah. And I think in the long term too, looking back, they'll recognize the sacrifice that you did make in letting them do that. And I think they'll appreciate that.
Yeah.
One of the things that you mentioned was if you plan to hire a babysitter for more than 4 hours, give the other parent the option to watch the kid. And that feels simple, but I think worth sharing. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a consideration, right? I mean, it's recognizing that the child's primary investment is in their biological dad and biological mom. And if you got a meeting, something's popped up, you just can't be with the child, rather than going to a friend of a friend of a friend to watch your kid, why not let the other household have a shot at it? Now, let me put this in context, because if you have a really antagonistic relationship with your former spouse, if you are Russia and Ukraine, and you know if you say, look, I'm going to have to be somewhere else and could you watch this child, that they're going to document it and use it against you in some court case. Okay, I'm not talking about you need to rethink that. But again, barring an extreme circumstance, it's just an act of consideration. This assumes you live close enough where you can actually make that kind of thing happen.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be for everybody, but what it does is it recognizes the child's investment in that most important person, their parent.
Yeah. And I keep on thinking that metaphor that you mentioned of the United States and Canada going back and forth so easily. And if you have that kind of relationship and that kind of dynamic, going over to another parent's house for 4 hours doesn't feel like going to war.
Yes,
and so
exactly.
I think that's a great metaphor to follow as well. You also said, resist the urge to only do special activities with all of the children around and not just some of the children. This is a little bit of a different context than what we were talking about with co-parenting, but this idea of having other children in the household, talk about that a little bit.
Well, for blended families, you can just imagine there's all kinds of configurations that happen in people's homes. So let's say a man with 2 kids marries a woman with 3 kids. Every other weekend, somebody's kids are going somewhere, but they all might go at the same weekend or it might not. Or, sometimes people don't switch on weekends. They switch in the middle of the week. And so you have all 5 kids for 2 days a week, but you only have 3 so a lot of different realities there. If you can recognize who's there, who's not there, what the situation requires of us, then you can make your plans and you can begin to try to honor the children that are there. When somebody's not there, you go, well, do we ever go out for pizza or go to a movie when they're not there? Well, the answer is yes, because you want those kids to feel like they have a family journey and experience with you and their step-parent. And that's a unit, if you will, a portion of the family that is together and connected. And we have a life together. Now, you wouldn't want to go to Disney World only when half the kids are there. Like the big things, you want to try to build around opportunities for everybody to be a part of it. But you need to have that. The temptation is if you only see your kids 1 weekend a month. We've actually heard this so many times through the years. Yeah, the kids only are with me 2 or 3 days a month, and so I just want to 100%, 24/7, throw all myself into them. Well, on one hand, absolutely, I get it, and you ought to invest a great deal of your time and energy in them. On the other hand, eventually there needs to be a little bit of other people involved in that, and so you try to build it around the family you're becoming, not just the portion of a family that you are, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I could definitely see a scenario happen where you have a kid that only visits once a month or whatever, and you say, on that day, I want to make everything about them. We're going to go out, get ice cream, make everything special. And I think you'll probably find over time that kind of becomes the expectation in the kid's mind. And then anything that's not the best day ever doesn't feel quite the same. And I can imagine the implications that might have on your relationship.
Yeah, and the message is to the other children that are in the house, maybe the siblings that are in there, like, well, he never takes us for ice cream. What does that say about us?
Yeah.
Are we less important? It just creates suspicion and doubt. Yeah, we're just trying to avoid that.
Yeah. Now, obviously, a huge part of the co-parenting / blended family dynamic is just the financial aspect of it. One of the things that you wrote was, have financial conversations in private. Your kids shouldn't be your messenger.
Yes.
Talk about that a little bit.
Especially when it comes to co-parenting. You're communicating to the other parent at the drop-off site, with the child standing there within earshot, hasn't hopped out of your car and gotten in the other car yet, but they're hearing you negotiate money, expenses, who's paying for what, who's got that medical bill, who's doing this, are you paying for their road trip with the baseball team, and often there's some tension around those conversations regarding money between co-parents. So again, that's an environment where you want to make that separate from your child. Kids will take on the burden of responsibility of trying to add to the negotiation process to keep the peace between mom and dad. It's not their job. I mean, you see really young children doing that all the way up, into young adulthood. And so if you separate that, they're not a part of it. I'm just going to add something here. We've actually got 9 books in our series for blended families, and one of them is a book called The Smart Step Family Guide to Financial Planning. It is all about managing money as a blended family. And these between-home issues can be flashpoints, and we address that in that book in greater detail than we did in The Smart Step Family. So I just want people to know there's a resource to really help you dig when it comes to managing your money and merging But, you married somebody, they got a 401k and so do you. Now what? They got a name on a house and you don't. Now what? You got insurance beneficiaries. Now what? How do we do that? That's what that book's all about.
Yeah, that is definitely a great resource for families. And I guess that brings me to my next question of, I know in our conversation today, we're touching on just a small fraction of the reality that exists for step families and blended family dynamics. But what are some other resources that couples that maybe are in a co-parenting relationship, maybe they're in a blended family dynamic, maybe they had a kid that lost a parent and now they are responsible for that child. What are some places that these people can look to for strengthening their relationship with the kid and the family as a whole?
FamilyLife.com/blended. Let me tell you, we have produced more resources in the last 20 years than the Christian community had in the previous 50 for blended families. We have a podcast, Family Life Blended Podcast. I do on a regular basis, over 130 episodes, on a lot of great stuff, and it's all free. We do a live stream event every spring that churches can host. Basically, it's a one-day marriage conference for couples and blended families, and your church can put it on for $100. We do ministry equipping. We gather leaders together to talk about local church ministry and what you can do, how you work with kids, students, adults, premarital counseling, all the above. We have a certificate course in blended family ministry, online on demand, 7 hours of training on the essentials of what stepfamily ministry looks like in a local church, very accessible for people to utilize. We have 8 different video curriculum that are available for small groups and Sunday school classes that couples can just watch at home if they want to, all on their own. In addition to the 9 books that I talked about, Gayla Grace, who serves on our team, a speaker and writer, does a monthly women and blended families live stream that goes out on YouTube. It's free. Every month we do this. Conversations that women want to know about who are a part of step families. And all of those are backlogged on our YouTube channel. We've got all kinds of stuff. 30 years ago, the biggest complaint I heard, Rob, from people was, where is the church when it relates to our life? Where are the resources? And I would just have to look at them and say, you're right, there's nothing out there. That's not the case anymore.
Yeah.
There is a lot that is available to people. So come to familylife.com/blended. We'll get you tied in.
It sounds like you guys have an abundance of resources. And I have to throw this out there while we're talking about it too. We have our Successful Step Families Marriage Retreat at WindShape in 2025. And so if you're listening to this conversation, you think, man, I would love to hear more from Ron or visit WindShape as a whole, that would be an awesome opportunity to plug in and get connected to our community as well.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. I do events for churches around the country on a regular basis, but I have to say, my favorite event every year is coming and spending 2.5 days at WindShape with couples and blended families. We get to rest and have dinner together and talk over a meal or get coffee, in the coffee shop.
Yeah.
Have popcorn late at night. It's amazing. And I do some teaching and we have conversation and we eat good food that WindShape provides. It is one of my favorite weekends. I've been doing it for about 20 years. And I would love to have you join me there.
Yeah, no, for sure. Now, Ron, I do want to end with some encouragement. I think families, especially in blended dynamics, they want to get through it. They want to get to a place where everything is fixed. They snap their fingers and everything's okay. When we say the word blended, there's this image of a blender. You press a button for 15 seconds and things are done. Could you talk a little bit about just timeline when it comes to merging 2 families together and what that looks like and what couples should expect?
Yeah. Well, as I say in the Smart Step Family book, you don't cook a step family in a blender. Yeah, because blenders have blades and they cut every ingredient up and it's really damaging to everybody. Everybody loses their identity. You're trying to force me to love people. Relationships don't work that way. But you do cook a step family in a crock pot, which is slow. And that's frustrating. How long does it take? On average, depends on what you're making, but 6 to 8 hours. The research on blended families is the average step family needs somewhere between 5 to 7 years to find their family identity, their fit, their connectedness. Yeah, it's a journey to build that level of depth into relationship. And one of the things we're going to try to help you do is understand that process, that journey, what to do, what not to do, how to cook well in a crock pot experience. And here's the hopefulness. At the end of the day, most of the things we love eating out of crock pots. I don't know about you, but it's a great way to come home at the end of a long day and it's done.
Certainly,
like it's just there, right? But of course, if you throw stuff in a crock pot, turn it on, and 20 minutes later come back, I don't recommend that at all, right? That's not necessarily going to taste good. There might be elements of it that taste good, but the whole thing together has not merged at all, right? Give it time. And when you get to that, then it really is something you can enjoy. And that's the experience I think most blended families have. The ones that stick it out, that persevere, that stay the course, that act with intentionality within their relationships, find that there's plenty there for them to enjoy.
Ron, thank you so much for your time today on the Win-Shaped Marriage podcast. And to those listening, we'll meet you back right here next week.
Hey there. If you're enjoying this conversation, make sure to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more marriage resources. And let us know what you think of this episode in the comments below.